Quentin State Prison, California, June 3, 1955. 11:28 a.m. A woman with tired eyes and fiery red hair is escorted into the gas chamber. Her name is Barbara Graham, but to the headlines she is known as Bloody Babs. She lowers herself into the metal chair, the final place she will ever sit. When the guards reach for the straps, she asks for a blindfold. She refuses to watch the witnesses gathered behind the glass. The executioner reminds her to inhale deeply once the gas begins. It will make the end softer, he claims. Barbara looks at him and fires back, "How would you know?" Moments later, she delivers her final words. Good people are always so sure they're right. In a few minutes, Barbara Graham will become the third woman executed in California's history. She was convicted of killing a 64-year-old widow during a robbery, but decades later, new evidence would expose a devastating truth. The trial that condemned her was built on lies. Like, share, and subscribe. This is Court of Secrets. For now, stay with us. Barbara Elaine Graham's life did not begin with violence, crime, or notoriety. It began with abandonment. She was born on June 26, 1923, in Oakland, California, into a life already shaped by instability. Her mother, Hortense Ford, was a teenage prostitute who never revealed the identity of Barbara's father. Before Barbara was even old enough to understand the world around her, she learned what it felt like to be unwanted. By the time she was 2, her mother had already given birth to another daughter, Claire Elizabeth, also out of wedlock. The two girls grew up knowing that their mother survived by selling her body. Poverty was their normal. Uncertainty was the foundation of their childhood. In 1929, a moment of hope briefly entered the Ford household. Hortense married a man named Joseph Wood. She, Barbara, and Claire took his surname. For the first time, it seemed like they might have a real family. But that dream collapsed almost instantly. Joseph died in January 1930, before ever meeting his newborn son. The fragile stability Hortense had found disappeared, and the children suffered the consequences. The spiral came fast. Hortense was arrested and sent to reform school, leaving Barbara to be placed in foster care. She later said she was beaten in those homes, treated as if she were a burden rather than a child. When Hortense was released years later, Barbara hoped she could finally return to her mother. Instead, Hortense refused to take her back. Barbara was handed from one home to another, passed between distant relatives and strangers who resented her presence. She was intelligent. She had potential, but no one cared enough to shape it. Her childhood became a lesson in survival, in loneliness, in learning that love was something other people received. By her teenage years, Barbara had nowhere to go and no one to guide her. She was arrested for vagrancy, essentially for being homeless. The state sent her to Ventura School for Girls, the same reform school that had once held her mother. History repeated itself with cruel precision. She was released at 16, determined not to become the woman the world already assumed she was. For a short time, she fought to break free of the cycle that defined her family. In 1940, she married a U.S. Coast Guardsman named Harry Keelhammer. She enrolled in business college. She tried to create a future built on dignity rather than survival. She even had 2 children with Harry. But Barbara's life had never known stability, and it wasn't going to start now. In 1942, Harry divorced her and was awarded custody of both boys. Barbara lost her children, just as she had lost her mother, her home, and her childhood. Over the next few years, she married 2 more times. Both marriages failed. Poverty returned. Desperation returned. And the path her mother once walked now stood before her. Barbara entered sex work during World War II. She worked near naval bases, following soldiers and sailors from city to city. She was arrested several times for vice-related charges. By 22, she had become a striking redhead with undeniable beauty, a woman men noticed and underestimated in equal measure. She eventually moved to San Francisco, where she worked for one of the most famous madams in the city, Sally Stanford. Money flowed, but so did danger. Barbara fell into circles of gamblers, drug users, and career criminals. Once inside that world, leaving it became nearly impossible. Then she made a decision that changed everything. To help petty criminals avoid charges, she agreed to lie for them in court. She was caught and convicted of perjury. Sentenced to 5 years in the California Women's State Prison in Tehachapi, she gained a record that would haunt her forever. That perjury conviction would later be used to destroy her credibility when she needed it most. After prison, she attempted a fresh start. She worked as a waitress, worked in hospitals, moved from Reno to Tonopah, then eventually boarded a bus for Los Angeles. But every attempt at normal life collapsed the moment poverty pushed her back into prostitution. By the early 1950s, her path crossed with a man who would seal her destiny. His name was Henry Graham, a bartender at one of the bars she frequented. They married, and she had a third child, a son named Tommy. Henry, however, was addicted to drugs and entangled with dangerous associates. Through him, Barbara met 2 men whose names would forever be linked to her downfall: Jack Santo and Emmett Perkins, known as the Weasel. Both men were hardened criminals with violent histories. Barbara became romantically involved with Perkins, and soon the trio was not just connected by personal entanglement, but by criminal opportunity. Perkins had a plan, one he sold as the opportunity of a lifetime. He claimed there was $100,000 hidden inside the home of a wealthy widow named Mabel Monahan. The rumor was false, born in criminal circles desperate for easy money. But Perkins believed it. Santo believed it. And soon Barbara did too. They planned a robbery that would go terribly, tragically wrong. The plan was simple, too simple, and that was the problem. Perkins and Santo believed Mabel Monahan was hiding a fortune. They believed a safe full of cash, $100,000, sat inside her home. The rumor traced back to Mabel's past connection to a wealthy casino man, Luther Scherer. Criminal circles whispered that she safeguarded money for him. There was no such safe. But belief tends to overpower truth, especially in the minds of men blinded by desperation. On March 8, 1953, Barbara met with Perkins, Santo, and 2 others, John True and Baxter Shorter, at a home in the San Fernando Valley. Shorter was a safecracker brought into the plan for one purpose: open the safe no one realized did not exist. From the beginning, Shorter didn't want Barbara involved. He said she was a dame, someone who would ruin everything, but Perkins convinced him otherwise. He argued that a woman was essential. A widow answering the door late at night would reject strange men, but a distressed woman claiming car trouble was another story. Barbara would be the bait. On the night of March 9, 1953, Barbara approached Mabel's door, pretending to need help. Mabel, kind and unaware of danger, opened the door. At that moment, the men rushed inside. What happened next was the subject of conflicting testimony, lies, and manipulated stories that would later decide life or death in a courtroom. According to Baxter Shorter, when he entered the home minutes later, Mabel was already gagged and bleeding. The others were ransacking the house in a frantic search for the imaginary safe. But John True offered a different story, one far more damaging to Barbara. True claimed Barbara handed a gun to Perkins and told him to knock her out. He claimed she participated in the assault. Whether he lied to save himself or to enhance the prosecution's narrative would become the heart of the case. What everyone agreed on was this: Mabel Monahan was tied up, gagged, and suffocated to death while the group tore through her belongings. No safe was found. No cash existed. They left empty-handed. 2 days later, Mabel's body was discovered. The police investigation began immediately. Perkins, Santo, and others were arrested, questioned, and released. Then Baxter Shorter, terrified of the gas chamber, decided to turn state's evidence. He told the police everything, and in doing so, he wrote his own death warrant. Perkins and Santo kidnapped and murdered him shortly after his release. The informant had been silenced as the circle closed in. Another witness emerged, William Upshaw, a criminal associate who said the group had planned surveillance and the robbery. But the prosecution needed someone who had been inside the house. Someone who could testify against all 3 suspects. Someone willing to point a finger directly at Barbara. That someone was John True. In exchange for full immunity, he agreed to testify. He would walk free. Barbara, Perkins, and Santo would fight for their lives. True's testimony became the backbone of the prosecution's case. He portrayed Barbara as the aggressor, the violent instigator, the one who set everything in motion. The newspapers devoured the story. They nicknamed her Bloody Babs. Her beauty became a weapon used against her. Reporters painted her as a femme fatale, a manipulative seductress capable of murder. Barbara insisted she was innocent of violence. She admitted being at the scene but denied assaulting Mabel. She claimed she never touched the elderly woman, but her past destroyed her credibility. Her prostitution record, her perjury conviction, and her relationships with criminals shaped the public's perception long before the trial even began. Then came the betrayal that sealed her fate. While awaiting trial in jail, Barbara grew close to another inmate, Donna Prow. They developed a romantic relationship. Prow claimed she knew someone who could fabricate an alibi for Barbara, for a price. Desperate, terrified, and believing she was out of options, Barbara agreed. She didn't know that Prow was working for the police the entire time. The friend offering the alibi was an undercover officer named Sam Sirianni. He insisted Barbara first admit she'd been at the home. Believing she was talking to an ally, Barbara admitted it. He recorded everything. The tape would be used to destroy her in court. Worse, once the trap had been sprung, police hid Donna Prow. They physically removed her from jail so the defense could never call her as a witness. Her absence prevented the truth from being revealed. On August 18, 1953, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters wrote sensational headlines daily. The public had already decided Barbara was guilty. When Sirianni played the taped confession and True testified that Barbara ordered the attack, the jury was convinced. All three defendants were found guilty of first-degree murder. All three were sentenced to death. Barbara's fate was sealed. Barbara arrived on death row at the California Institution for Women in Chino as the only woman facing execution in the state. Her cell was small, isolated, and silent. She spent her days writing letters, reading, and thinking about her children. Her lawyers immediately began the appeals process, arguing that the trial had been tainted by hidden evidence, manipulation, and coerced statements. But the courts rejected every attempt. What no one knew then, what would not be revealed for 7 decades, was that prosecutors had concealed a critical piece of evidence. John True's original statement to the police contradicted his testimony at trial. It painted a different picture of what happened inside Mabel Monahan's home. In the first version, Barbara was not described as violent. She was not portrayed as the aggressor. And True did not claim she handed a gun to Perkins or beat Mabel. But the defense never saw that statement. The prosecution withheld it. Barbara's lawyers had no investigators, no money, and no way of finding hidden witnesses. They didn't know the state had concealed Donna Prow. They didn't know True had changed his story. They didn't know the case had been built on manipulated testimony, corruption, and desperation to secure a high-profile conviction. Barbara sat in her cell unaware that evidence capable of saving her life was sitting in a locked file. By 1955, her appeals were exhausted. Her execution date was set for June 3rd. The night before, she was transferred to San Quentin, where the gas chamber awaited her. She spent the final hours alone. There were no family visits recorded. No one held her hand. No one comforted her. She was 31 years old, facing death in a cold concrete room. On the morning of June 3rd, at 10 a.m., her execution was scheduled. But the governor issued a stay. Not a pardon. Not hope. Just a delay. It was psychological torture. At 10:45 a.m., another stay came. Then another. Barbara grew furious, asking why they insisted on prolonging her suffering. She believed each delay might be her last moment of hope, only to learn the state was merely adjusting the schedule. At 11:28 a.m., guards came for her. 2 minutes before the final deadline. She would die alone, except for the witnesses watching through the glass. She requested a blindfold. She didn't want to see their faces as she died. Before the cyanide pellets dropped, Barbara spoke her final words. "Good people are always so sure they're right." It was both an accusation and a revelation, a direct challenge to the system that condemned her. The executioner, meaning well but lacking understanding, suggested she take a deep breath to make the process easier. Barbara responded sharply. "How the hell would you know?" Moments later, the pellets fell. The deadly gas rose around her. A gas chamber execution is slow, painful. The body convulses as cyanide prevents cells from absorbing oxygen. Witnesses watch every moment. Barbara died after several minutes of agony. She was pronounced dead at 11:42 a.m. Santo and Perkins were executed later the same day. Barbara's body was taken from the prison and buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery in San Rafael. The newspapers reported every detail. Some celebrated, believing justice had been served. Others wondered if the state had executed a woman who was guilty of robbery, yes, but not necessarily of murder. The debate continued for decades. In 1958, Hollywood released I Want to Live, based on letters Barbara wrote while awaiting execution. It portrayed her as possibly innocent, framed by corrupt officials. Susan Hayward's performance won an Academy Award. The film reshaped Barbara's public image. It made many believe she had been wrongfully executed. Reporters who covered the trial argued that the movie exaggerated. But the film sparked a national conversation about the death penalty, wrongful convictions, and the treatment of women in the justice system. In 1983, a TV movie revived the debate. Then, in 2024, a groundbreaking revelation changed everything. Marcia Clark, the former prosecutor famous for the O.J. Simpson trial, re-examined Barbara's case. She obtained trial transcripts, police records, and production files from the 1958 film. She uncovered John True's original statement. The statement prosecutors HIDIT contradicted nearly every part of his trial testimony. Clark also uncovered evidence showing the state deliberately hid Donna Prow, preventing the defense from calling her. And she confirmed the prosecution manipulated Barbara into the fake alibi scheme. For the first time in 70 years, the truth emerged. Barbara Graham likely did participate in the robbery, but she likely did not assault Mabel Monahan. John True, the state's star witness, was almost certainly lying to secure his immunity deal, and the prosecutors let it happen. They needed a villain. They needed a sensational conviction. Barbara became the perfect target. The truth that emerged 70 years later fundamentally changed the way Barbara's case is understood. Marcia Clark's findings painted a picture not only of flawed justice but of deliberate wrongdoing. A case built on desperation, hidden evidence, manipulated witnesses, and the ambition of prosecutors eager to make headlines. Clark concluded that Barbara was almost certainly present during the robbery. She likely knocked on Mabel's door and lured her into opening it. But Clark found no credible evidence that Barbara pistol-whipped or beaten Mabel, nor that she instructed the men to do it. The violence that killed Mabel was likely committed by either Perkins or John True. Yet True walked away free, protected by his immunity deal. Barbara was legally guilty of felony murder. Under the law, if someone dies during the commission of a felony, everyone involved can be charged with murder. But felony murder is not the same as brutality. And it is not the same as being the killer. Yet Barbara was sentenced as if she alone committed the crime. The trial had been stacked against her from the beginning. Reporters turned her into a villain. Prosecutors used her beauty as a weapon, painting her as a manipulative temptress leading men into chaos. Her past, prostitution, poverty, instability, was used to claim she was inherently deceitful. The public believed the caricature, not the woman. Her defense was underfunded, overstretched, and unaware that crucial witnesses had been hidden. They didn't know the prosecution withheld John True's earlier statement. They didn't know about the manipulation behind the fake alibi scheme. They didn't know that the key witness against Barbara had changed his entire story. The truth was sitting in dusty files for decades, never seen by those who might have saved her life. In the end, the state executed Barbara Graham not because she was the most dangerous participant, but because she was the easiest to vilify. A beautiful woman accused of a brutal crime made for irresistible headlines. A conviction made careers. Her execution was symbolic, not just penal. The tragedy of Barbara's story is not only that she died, it's that the truth was buried so deeply that the system never gave her a fair chance. No jury heard the full story. No judge saw the hidden evidence. No defense attorney knew the testimony was manipulated. Barbara Graham's life was shaped by abandonment, poverty, trauma, and a justice system eager to punish her for a lifetime of sins she never committed. The final question remains: was her execution wrongful? Legally, she was guilty of felony murder. Morally, ethically, and factually, the story is far more complicated. The actual attacker likely walked free. The prosecution withheld evidence that could have changed the verdict. A key witness lied. Another was hidden. And Barbara died believing no one had listened to her truth. Today, the case stands as a symbol of injustice. A reminder that the courtroom is not always a place of truth, but sometimes a battlefield of narratives shaped by power, ambition, and public opinion. A reminder that the death penalty leaves no room for correction when the truth surfaces later. Barbara Graham's final words echoed through the decades. Good people are always so sure they're right. Her execution became one of California's most controversial cases not because of what she did, but because of what was done to her. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, fairness, and who is deemed worthy of mercy. And it forces us to ask, should a woman who never struck the fatal blow die alongside the men who did? The world will never know how Barbara's life might have turned out if someone, anyone, had offered her a chance at stability, love, or redemption. Instead, her fate was shaped by a lifetime of abandonment, desperation, and a justice system that decided her story before she ever stepped into a courtroom. Her legacy now stands as a warning, a reminder that tragedies do not begin at the crime. They begin long before, in the choices society makes about whose lives matter. Barbara Graham was flawed, imperfect, and human, but she deserved a fair trial. She didn't get 1.70 years later. The evidence proves it. Barbara Graham's story forces us to look beyond the headlines and confront the uncomfortable questions we often avoid. Her case reveals how gender shapes judgment in ways we fail to acknowledge. Why are so few women executed in America, and why did Barbara become one of the rare exceptions? Her looks made her more noticeable. Her past made her more condemnable. And the nickname Bloody Babs framed her as a villain before the jury ever heard her speak. Would a man in her position, with the same level of involvement, have faced the same fate? Or was Barbara's execution a reflection of society's hunger for a dramatic conviction? Prosecutors saw her case as an opportunity, the public saw her as a symbol, and the state saw her as a solution to an unsolved murder. She had no money, no support, and no credibility. She was an easy target. California continued to carry out executions after Barbara, but her case became a reference point in every major discussion about capital punishment. Questions about reliability, bias, and wrongful convictions became impossible to ignore. 70 years later, her execution still divides people. Some believe justice was served. Others believe the state killed a woman whose trial was fundamentally flawed. Her final words linger like a warning. Good people are always so sure they're right. Those words shake our assumptions about guilt and certainty. They remind us that confidence is not the same as truth, and that a courtroom is not always a place where justice prevails. But as we talk about Barbara, we must also remember the victim. Mabel Monahan, a 64-year-old widow and former performer who spent her final moments bound, beaten, and terrified. She died because someone believed a false rumor about hidden mob money. Her daughter lost her mother to senseless violence. The tragedy begins with Mabel, and it must end with her too. The question is not whether her murder deserved punishment. The question is whether the right people were punished, and whether the punishment fit their role in the crime. Barbara participated, but she was not the one who delivered the fatal blows. John T.R., the man most likely responsible, walked free with immunity. Is that justice, or is it convenience disguised as law? According to investigators who revisited the case decades later, if the truth had been presented honestly, Barbara Graham would not have received the death penalty. And that conclusion forces us to confront a painful reality. One murder led to 3 executions. Children lost a mother. Families were shattered. A state carried out a death sentence based on tainted evidence and manipulated witnesses. How many other cases share that same pattern? How many other executions were built on hidden deals, suppressed statements, or desperate informants? Barbara's final words still echo across the decades. Good people are always so sure they're right. But should we be? Justice demands more than confidence. It requires fairness, honesty, and humility. Without those things, we are not delivering justice. We are ending lives. If this story made you think differently, hit like, share this video, and subscribe to Court of Secrets so you never miss another case that changed everything.